Good evening. We are learning Maseches Pesachim Daf Lamed Ches, and we are starting 3 lines from the bottom with the statement of Rav Asi. Though if you analyze the statement of Rav Asi, who was an Amora, you'll see that all of the statements that he makes seem to be of Tanaim. They seem to be about machlokos between Rav Meir and the Chachamim. As we will see, it's not so clear that these Tanaim actually said these shitas. Let's get started with the 3 cases. Amar Rav Asi, 3 lines from the bottom, Lamed Zayin and the Beis. Rav Asi said 3 cases. Number 1, Isa shel Meiser Sheni. If you have dough of Meiser Sheni, can that be used for, is that chayiv in challah? Says the Gemara, L'dibi Rav Meir P'tura Min Challah. According to Rav Meir, the Isa shel Meiser Sheni, the dough of Meiser Sheni is exempt from challah. Why is that true? Says Rashi, 2 lines from the bottom, Dibur HaMaskal P'tura Min Challah, Kedim Mefarish, Da'ariso Sechem Ksiv Velo Shel Gvoa. There's a din of lachem, as we loosely refer to a number of mitzvahs, that they have a din of lachem, that they have to be yours in order to trigger a certain chiyuv. We know that that's true by the lulav and esrog, which we'll see in a moment at the top of the Amud, but that's probably the most well-known din of lachem. And here, as the Gemara, that it's P'tura Min Challah because it is not yours, it belongs to.
I thought you said.
So the next case, they hold that the Isa of Meiser Sheni would be chayiv in challah. As we turn to the top of Lamed Ches and Beis, Lamed Ches and Aleph, we see case number 2 that Rav Asi presents. Matzos shel Meiser Sheni. What about matzah? There we have the same din. If you have a matzah that was made from Meiser Sheni, the halacha is that you're not yotzei the mitzvah of matzah. They hold, in fact, you are. Case 3 lines down, Lamed Ches and Aleph. Esrog shel Meiser Sheni. What about an esrog to be yotzei with the daled meaning? L'dibi Reb Meir ein yotzei bo yedei chavasa b'yom tov. L'dibi Chachamim madam yotzei bo yedei chavasa b'yom tov. If the esrog is Meiser Sheni, machlokes tanaim. So this is the 3 machlokos tanaim. Number 1 is in regards to Isa shel Meiser Sheni. Number 2 is in regards to Matzah shel Meiser Sheni. And number 3 is Esrog shel Meiser Sheni. In all 3 cases, Rav Meir was of the opinion that you are putter. If you're putter from challah, in regards to the case of Isa, you're not putter, but you're not yotze, the mitzvah of matzah, if you eat a matzah of Meiser Sheni. And in the 3rd case, the Esrog does not count. Let's see what's going on here. Says the Gemara, Maskif la Rav Papa. Rav Papa asks the following question: Bishlama Isa. I understand why Rav Meir would say you're putter when it comes to the Isa of Meiser Sheni D'chsiv Ariso Sechem Mishalachem, because it says Ariso Sechem. It has to be your challah, it has to be your dough. Mishalachem, it has to be yours. Since it's not yours, how can you be chayiv in challah? You can't be chayiv in someone else's obligations. It's not yours, so you're putter. Also Esrog Nami. I also understand case 3 of Rav Asi, that Rav Meir would say that in such a case you are not able to fulfill the mitzvah of an esrog because daled meaning why d'chsiva lakachtem lachem mishalachem yehei, it should be yours. And in fact, we know the famous sheet in the poskim that you should not give a katan your lulav and esrog on day 1, because if you're giving it to them, a katan has the capacity to be koneh, but not to be makneh back to you. And that causes a serious problem if you don't have another lulav and esrog, in which case it's better to borrow from a friend who's an adult. If your kids are bar mitzvah, of course, that's fine. But if you give it to a katan, so they can be koneh but can't be makneh, which causes a lot of problems. So says the Gemara, here's the question, 10 lines down. Elamatza, I don't understand. Rav Meir, I understood your shita by Isa shel Meiser Sheni, and I understand your shita by Esrog shel Meiser Sheni, but by matzah, does matzah have a din of lachem? It says the Gemara, Ela matzah, miksiv, matzaschem. A little playful the Gemara is today. Do you ever see a pasuk that says matzaschem, your matzah? There is no such pasuk. So says the Gemara, Omar Rava, how do we answer this question against Rav Meir? Rav Asi's explanation of Rav Meir was that all 3 of these cases are going to be exempt, seemingly because they have the status of lachem. So says the Gemara, what's the pshat here? Omar Rava v'itema Rav Yemar bar Shalamya, asya lechem lechem. Asya, we are going to bring a gzera shava of lechem. Lechem, the 2 words that are going to be common within the following 2 psukim. Ksiv hacha, in one case we have by matzah lechem oni, as we know. Uksiv hasam, and in the other case we have b'haya be'och lechem lechem haaretz malahalan mishalachem afkan mishalachem. So we see that there is a din of matzah shalachem. Beautiful. So we asked against Rav Asi, how is it that you understood that Rav Meir is going to be pater by matzah? Hare, we don't have a din of lachem like we do by Isa and like we do by Esrog. So why would you say by matzah that you're not going to be able to fulfill the mitzvah if it belongs to the gavoa, if it's Meiser Sheni? Answers the Gemara. We have a gezerah shava. We have a comparison between the word lachem in 2 places, and just like in one case there's a din of lachem by the world of by the world of challah, so to over here by the world of matzah, lechem oni. That word lachem functions as the other side of the bridge. We therefore learn that there is a din of lachem. So how does that work? Let's say a katan passes you matzah during the seder. That's probably not a kinyan. But if a katan is mamish makneh, if he's kone himself, you can, according to this line of Rava, there is a din of lachem by matzah, in which case you have to make sure it's mamish yours. You have to make sure that you actually own it, otherwise you're not yotzei. So says the Gemara, maybe we can bring a proof to how Ravasi understood the three approaches of Rav Meir. What's the raya? A quarter of the way down, lema misayele. Whenever we see the language of lema misayele, where it implies that we're going to be seeing a shita that matches in some way what we've previously learned. Let's see the brisa that somewhat matches. Says the Gemara, Isa shel meiser sheni. This is a brisa that's quoted in Maseches Sanhedrin Kuf Yud Beis. Isa shel meiser sheni. Wow, that's extremely similar to our case that we started with on the bottom of Lamed Zayin Amud Beis. If you look on the bottom of Lamed Zayin Amud Beis, 2 lines down, it says the same thing. Yisa Shal Meister Sheni, Rav Meir says it's pater. So it says the Gemara, Lema Misayeya. Lema Misayeya means the cases are similar, but it's a variant. This is not a variant. Hainu hach. This is the same exact din. So then if that's true, then why does Ravasi say what he says? Why bother saying something? If you have a brisa that says what you say, then why are you saying anything? Leave it alone. You got a brisa. Says the Gemara, Hachi Kamar, 2 different answers. Lema mideplige beisa, the hanach nami plige. See, one way to understand the Gemara of Ravasi, the Ravasi that we started with tonight, these 3 approaches of Rav Meir and the Chachamim, is that he only knew about the first one because of the Brisa and Sanhedrin Kuf Yud Beis. What does it say there? That's this line over here, that Isa Shal Meiser Sheni is pater from Chal according to Rav Meir and Chayev according to the Chachamim. And because there's an argument over there, B'hanach Nami Pligi, in the other 2 cases, in other words, Ravasi was making a tzushtel. He looked at what the Brisa said in Sanhedrin Kuf Yud Beis and said, I see a machlokes Rav Meir and the Chachamim. It must also be true by esrog and by matzah. That's what the Gemara's assumption is here. Or another possibility, Dilma, no, that's not true. Shiny Hassam, maybe that case is different over there. It says Arisosechem twice. And really, that none of Rav Meir has anything to do with the din of Lachem. And the other case of Lachem that we have by Esrog, because we do have that language, Rashi explains this away. Rashi says that extra case of Lachem is to exclude Sha'ul v'Gazul, that if you borrow someone's matzah, someone's esrog, or if it's stolen, then you cannot be yotzei. But in general, there's no formal din of lachem, just that it can't be stolen. 2 different approaches. Good. Now the Gemara is going to spend the next half of an amud trying to figure out simply what the question is that we're asking. 2 different approaches. Ba'a Rav Shimon ben Lakish. Rav Shimon ben Lakish asked the following question. We're halfway down on Lamed Ches Amud Aleph. So it says the Gemara as follows. Rav Shimon ben Lakish had a question. What would be the din, asks Rav Shimon ben Lakish, for a person to be yotzei, for a person to if a person can make matzah out of challah, shel meiser sheni b'Yerushalayim. So you have challah of meiser sheni, and you're in Yerushalayim. Can you make matzah out of that and be yotzei? Says the Gemara. What? If you redeemed it. Well, let's get into the Gemara. That's going to come up right now. Very good. That's exactly right, Gerald. Says the Gemara as follows. Aliba de Rabbi Yossi Haglili lo tibaylach. This question is not a question according to Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Hashta b'chulin lo nafik. He doesn't even allow it to be used in the chulin form. Forget about the challah form. What we're talking about here is after you've separated the challah from the batch. You have all the dough and you're mafresh challah. So once you mafresh the challah has its own status. It's called challah, and the rest of it is now chulin. Once you've separated out the chulin, even Rabbi Yossi Haglili says that even the chulin is problematic because, as we learned a couple of days ago, Rashi 6-7 lines down reminds us of this. Rashi says, "Dibur hamaschil to Rabbi Yossi Haglili to Amar Le'el." Remember, we spoke about the other day the drasha between Oni and Ani, Rabbi Yossi Haglili versus Rabbi Akiva. And there we said that within the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Haglili, that you're not allowed to eat Meiser Sheni for matzah, because Meiser Sheni has to be eaten b'simcha. And matzah has a din of lechem oni. So according to Rabbi Yossi Haglili, you can never eat Meiser Sheni, not the Challah Shabo, and not the Chulin Shabo. No matter what, you're not allowed. So that's what the Gemara is saying here. Aliba Rabbi Yossi Haglili lo tibaylach. There's no question according to him. He forbids making matzah for Meiser Sheni under all circumstances. Hashta b'chulin lo nafik b'chalasam ibaya, because it has to be eaten b'simcha, and matzah has to be lechem oni. Remember, his drasha was, we read it yesh aim l'mesorah. How do we read the word? It's written ayin nun yud, but we read it oni. So he says, no, that implies aninus. Oh, so he excludes it from there. Kiti bailach. Where does our question of Meiser Sheni, of the chal of Meiser Sheni being matzah, where does that come in? Alibad Rabbi Akiva. What does he say? The chulin hu denafik. We know that one can fulfill the mitzvah of matzah with chulin. De'imitmu yesh lahen heter b'moshavos. That if in fact the chulin, what used to be the whole batch, and then you were mafresh challah, whatever's left over after the hafrasha challah, that's allowed to be used for matzah, because even if it became tameh, you could eat it outside of Yerushalayim. That's not a problem because it doesn't have a din of chulin. It's been hufrash already. The chulin's been taken away already. The chalah's been taken away. Aval challah, but maybe the challah itself to imitamya. If that which you separated for the mitzvah of hafrasha challah became tameh, there less leheter b'moshavo. So the sreifa azla. There you can't eat that anywhere other than where it is, and it's burnt now, and now it's l'sreifa azla. Now it's tameh. You have nothing else to do. Lo nafik, and therefore you cannot be. Nafik means to be yotze, to fulfill the mitzvah of challah. O dilma, or perhaps amrinan hoil. We've seen this a number of times in Shas. Hoil is a svara. It's a logic that says, if in theory case X would apply, I would have been exempt. So even though now the case doesn't apply, I still should be exempt because of hoil. So what's the hoil here? Says the Gemara, O dilma, hoil, amrinan hoil. We will say that you should be yotze, the mitzvah of matzah, because hoil, since in theory we could have argued as follows. V'lo kara aleh Hashem, had it been in theory that I had not yet separated the challah to be koreh aleh Hashem, to be mafresh and say this is challah, and then v'itmei, islay hutar, islay heter b'moshavos v'nafik be, hashtanam nafik. So this is the shaila that we have within Rabbi Akiva. Do we say that the challah itself, that had it become tameh, it's going to be burned, and therefore you cannot be yotze? Or do we apply the principle of hoil, that since had it been that you were not mafresh challah yet, you could have eaten it in the moshav outside of Yerushalayim, then even if you have been mafresh the challah, you're still allowed to eat it because of hoil. Do we say that, yes or no? Says the Gemara, that is approach number one. Here's approach number two, 3/4 of the way down. Ika de'amre, there are those who say that even this question was obvious. Ika de'amre, havadai lo tibailach, devadai amrinan hoel. That's for sure not a question. The way we just explained the question within the camp of Rabbi Akiva, that is also not a shaila. We do say hoel. Ki tibailach, where do we actually have our question about making matzah out of challah shel meiser sheni? Ki tibailach, challah halakuach bekesef meiser sheni. It's for even further away from the actual meiser sheni. This is challah that was purchased with the money of meiser sheni. Ve'aliba derabanan lo tibailach. According to the sheet of the Rabbanan, it's also not a question. For sure, it's going to be mutter. For sure, you can make matzah out of that. Kevan de amre yipadeh hainu meiser. Since you are allowed to redeem that, you're allowed to redeem that challah. We'll see what that means in a moment. If it becomes tameh, you can redeem it. Hainu meiser. It's no different than the meiser sheni itself. It's no different than the chulin of meiser sheni, where you can do a pidyon and eat it outside of Yerushalayim. Kiti bailach. Where would we have the opinion? It's not according to the Rabbanan. Ali b'der Yehuda damar yikaver, who says that you'd have to bury it. Let's see what the question is. Ditznan, what does the Mishnah write? Halakuach kesef meiser sheni. Let's say that someone buys something with the coins of meiser sheni. Shenitma, and it became tamei. The halacha is the Tanakama says yipadet. That's the sheet of the Rabbanan that we just saw a moment ago. Rabbi Yehuda Amar yikaber, and he says you have to bury it. So now, according to this version of the Gemara, this is version 2 of the question. And within version 2, we're not asking from the Rabbanan. There we know their shita, they'd be lenient. We're asking specifically from the camp of the shita of Rabbi Huda. Here is the Gemara's question, 6 lines from the bottom. Mi amrinan, do we say a double hoil? Do we say hoil number 1? Remember what we said, a hoil is like a halachic gymnastics game, right? If in theory X could have happened, even though it didn't, I'm going to be lenient. Here's hole number 1. Mi amrinan hoil be'ilo lakuach habe. Maybe hole number 1 is in theory, I didn't even have to buy it. But now that I bought it, I can still be lenient. What's hole number 2? The hoel v'lo kara le Hashem, had it been that I didn't even separate out the challah yet, the itmu, and had it then become separated and become tameh, yesh lo heter b'moshavos v'nafik bei. With this double hoel, I could have, in theory, constructed a case with a double hoel. Maybe I didn't really purchase it with kesef meiser, and maybe I hadn't yet really been separating the challah yet. With that double hoel, the nafik be, I could be yotze, hashtanami nafik be. So too, in this case, even though I have done those things, I would say I can still be yotze with the challah of meiser sheni, because no, that's how hoel works. Hoel is a halachic loophole. It's a theoretical possibility that we take into account. Or dilma, or perhaps maybe the Gemara is saying chad hoel amrinan tre hoel amrinan, or maybe you could say no, we would only embrace one hoel, but we do not embrace 2 cases of hoil. So says the Gemara, Omar Rava, 3 lines from the bottom. How do we answer the question? Mistabra, shame, meiser chadhu. The Gemara undermines the question entirely. What does it mean the Gemara undermines the question entirely? It means that really it's all talking about one thing, the purchasing versus the not purchasing. If it's Meiser Sheni direct or the purchase of Meiser Sheni direct, it all has the same din of Meiser. Now, we don't answer the question of whether or not we use a double hoil. The Gemara circumvents the question because the question was clearly flawed. The Gemara looked at the question of Meiser Sheni versus purchased Meiser Sheni as one and the same. That's what the Gemara says here, Mistabra Shem Meiser Chadhu, and therefore we don't have the answer to the double hoil question. We just know what the halacha is, that we view it as one and the same, and therefore the halacha would be that yes, you can make matzah out of the challah of Meiser Sheni. We said in our Mishnah on Lamed Hey back in the day, a few days ago, we said there, I'll just read the Mishnah for you if you want to flip back. It's Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, 1/3 of the way down there. There the Mishnah said that chalos hatoda, the breads of the korban toda, and as well urakike nazir, the thin wafer crackers that were made for the sake of a nazir, we made a distinction in the Mishnah that if he made them for himself, asan le'atzmo, for the sake of korbanos, ein yotze bahem. But asan limkor b'shuk, had he made them to sell, then we said yotzin behen. So that's what the Gemara is going to be asking about. How does that work? Chalas toda, 2 lines from the bottom, chalas toda rikike nazir b'chulei, and the distinction therein that if it was made for the sake of korbanos, it doesn't count as matzah. But if it was made for the sake of selling in a shuk, it does count as matzah. Why the distinction? How do you know that that's true? 2 answers. Answer number 1, last line. Amar Rabba Damar Kra, turning to the top of Lamed Chesim and Beis, Ushmartem es hamatzos. The pasuk says, Ushmartem es hamatzos. Matzah hamishtameres, l'shem matzah. Only matzah that is created, that is literally protected for the sake of matzah. Yatzis sazu, to exclude. What is the pasuk excluding? She'ein mishtameres l'shem matzah, elo l'shem zevach. I didn't make the chalos toda for sales. I didn't make it for matzah. I made it because the Torah said, go make it. Not to be yotzei the mitzvah. It had its own purpose. So this, answer number 1, according to Rabbah, is that I need to exclude the case of the Rikike Nazir and the case of the Chalas Toda because those were made for Zevach purposes. They weren't made for the mitzvah of Achilas Matzah. This gets into the sugya of Lishma, of making things for the right reasons. We know that there's a din of Lishma. We know that there's supposed to be a Shmira on the matzah. This is matzah, shmura matzah, as we call it loosely. Shmura matzah, the Bir Allah has a whole din in this, as do many poskim, whether or not it's appropriate to push and try that during the Seder, l'chol hapachos, on the 15th of Nisan at night. You should try to have shmura matzah, shmura mishas ksir of elech, from the time that it's cut, to make sure that it doesn't have a lot of moisture on it. Fine, all of this is connected to this sugya. That is answer number 1. 3 lines down, let's see answer number 2. Answer number 2 says the Gemara, again, our question, what is the reason for the distinction by the Chalos Toda and by the Rekike Zevach? Why is it that we say that when it's made for Zevach purposes, that it doesn't count, but when you make it for sale purposes, it does? Where do we know that there needs to be this element of Lishma for making matzah? Says Rabbi Yosef, Amar, he says, Amar Kra, the Pasuk says, Shivas Yomim matzos tochelu. The Pasuk says, you eat matzah for 7 days. Matzah nechelu, so Shivas Yomim. You need bread that you can eat for 7 days. We have a din of nosar by korbanos. We have a din of expiry. These things don't last forever. So when you have the chalas toda and the rakike nazir, they only last night and day, and then they're done for. They're inherently flawed to be matzah because they don't last the shivas yamin, based on a pasuk. It's not based on svara. So answer number 2 says the Gemara is that it's based on the fact that there's an expiration date on the chalos toda and on the rakike nazir. Very good. So answer number 1, ushmartem es hamatzos. This doesn't count because it was not made for the sake of matzah. It was made for the sake of zevach. Answer number 2 is that there's an expiration date on the chalas toda and on the Rikike Nazir, and that is a limitation. We can't have matzah that has an expiry date on it. In fact, the Gemara presents brisas according to each of them. Tanya Kavase de Rabba. The Tanya Kavase de Rabbi Yosef, about 8 lines down, the Maseches and Beis, there's a brisa that matches each of them, and they match perfectly. Take a look at this. Tanya Kavase de Rabba. Yachol yese yedecho vasa bechalos todo Rikike Nazir. Maybe one would assume that you can fulfill the mitzvah d'oraisa of eating matzah with chalas toda Rikike Nazir, with the challah that's brought as part of the zevach, as part of the korban toda, and the Rikike Nazir, the wafers that are used for a nazir. Talmud lomar ushmartem es hamatzos. This was answer number 2, and a perfect brisa to match. Matzah hamishtameres l'shem matzah. Yatzis sazu she'ein hamishtameres l'shem matzah l'shem zevach. The way that the chalas toda were made, the way that the Rikike Nazir were made, they were made with one purpose. It was l'shem zevach. Eating matzah is not l'shem zebach; it's l'shem mitzvah. It's lacking, and it's not right. You did it for the wrong reasons. And then Tanya Kavasi de Rabbi Yosef. This is the answer that we saw. The second answer that we saw. I think I made a mistake and said that Rabbah was the second answer. Rabbah was the first answer. Here's the second answer. Tanya Kavasi de Rabbi Yosef. 1/3 of the way down. Maybe one would think that they can fulfill the mitzvah of matzah with the chalos toda, with the breads of the korban toda, the rikik nazir, the wafers for the nazir. And that's not going to work. Talmud Lomar, the same pasuk that Rabbah quoted above. You need matzah that's eligible to be eaten over all 7 days. To exclude these, the chalos toda and the rikik and others. They have an expiry date, 1 day, 1 night, and then you're done. And because they have an expiry date, they're flawed. They have a character flaw. I mean, they're done. They can't be used for matzah. Even though during that time they're mutter. There's the day and night where the rikike nazir are perfect. It doesn't make a difference. They're ineligible to be matzah. We need matzah that can last for all 7 days. If it can't last for all 7 days, because halacha makes it nosar, whatever the expiry date is in halachic terms, not on the box. Anything in halachic terms that's an expiry date, done, is ineligible from day one. Asks the Gemara, almost halfway down, lechem oni. Why didn't you say what we said the other day? What's the din of lechem oni? Lechem oni, mishenechal be'aninus. These are korbanos. Korbanos have to be eaten b'simcha. So why don't you say that the character flaw of the chalos toda and the rikike nazir is that they have to be eaten b'simcha? And matzah is the opposite. Matzah has to be eaten b'aninus. Says the Gemara, you can't say that. You can't say that the flaw of chalos toda and rikike nazir is that they have to be eaten b'simcha. Why? Because we know that there's a sheet in the Tanaim that allows it. Says the Gemara, Savalak Rabbi Akiva, Damar Aniksiv. Remember we said, Yesh Aim Lemikra. Look at the way the word is written in the Torah. Lechem, it's red only, but the word has no vav. So Rabbi Akiva says, Yesh Aim Lemikra. We always follow the text itself. Get the vowels out. There are no vowels. There's no vav in the word oni. It's a little dot at the top. So he says it's the word ani. That doesn't imply aninus. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva would say that it doesn't apply here. And therefore, we cannot learn out the limitation of chalos toda and rikike nazir from aninus. Next, halfway down, we know that there was a little bit of oil that was put in here. So if there's oil, we said a couple of blot ago, where was that? That was Lamed Vav, Lamed Hey, Lamed Beis, right at the top. It says, Umei Peres and Machmitz, and we know that these things don't cause for chametz. Why would you say that maybe they're excluded because it's ineligible? Because if it can't be chametz, then it can't be matzah. But this is oil. Oil doesn't make chametz. So maybe that's what we should have said. But typically, the havali matzah shira. It's not eligible because of matzah shira. Says Gemara, no, come on. It's such a small amount of oil that it's irrelevant. And fascinatingly, that means that it's mutter to put some small amount of oil in the matzah. Says the Gemara, Amar Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak reviisi. It's just a small amount. It's a reviis of oil. Umischalekes hilakam chalos, and it's put in, and it's diversified over all the chalos that are resulting. You know, like when you're measuring out calories, you have a batch of food. You put in a cup of oil. Not every brownie has a cup of oil in it. You divide by whatever the square footage is. You take the area and you divide and you figure out your calories. Same thing here is a tiny, per piece of challah, it's tiny. It's a small amount. That's not going to make the matzah ineligible from being matzah. It's not going to make it matzah shira. It's a tiny amount of oil, and therefore you can't learn from the fact that there's a small amount of oil in the rikike nazir and in the chalos toda that it's ineligible to be chametz and therefore ineligible to be matzah. It's not true. It's too small of an amount, won't ruin it. Let's try again. Maybe we should have said that maybe it's inedible in all locations because they had to be eaten in a special place. What do we learn from here? The fact that by virtue of the fact that the Gemara doesn't give this as an answer, we saw the answer of Rav Yosef and Rabbah, not in that order, Rabbah and Rav Yosef. But here Rish Lakish says we're learning something subtle from the Gemara. By virtue of the fact that we don't answer that it was only eaten in Yerushalayim shows us that the chalos toda and the rikike nazir were eaten outside of Yerushalayim. Where were they eaten? Amar Rish Lakish zotameres chalos toda rikike nazir ne'echalin benov v'givon. Where they had a mizbech, a bama, this was in the time when a bama was mutter, external to the Beis Hamikdash. There were times we were allowed to bring korbanos that weren't in Yerushalayim. There are some exclusions in the times of Tanakh, and Nov was one of them, and in Givon as well. That was outside of Yerushalayim. But haraya, that chalos toda and rikike nazir could be eaten outside of Yerushalayim. Therefore, the answer doesn't work. Beautiful. One last brisa for the night. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Eloi, Sha'alti es Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eloi said, I asked Rabbi Eliezer, Mao she'yetze adam echalos toda rikike nazir. Can you just tell me the din Remember, the answers that we saw were in the Amoraim. This is going back in the times of the Tanaim. We didn't have the Rabbah and Rav Yosef answers yet. So the Talmud is saying to the Rebbe hundreds of years prior to Rabbah and Rav Yosef. Rabbah and Rav Yosef were already 3 centuries in. They're 75, 100 years into the times of the Amoraim. This was well before that. So Rabbi Loi says to Rabbi Eliezer, what's the story with being Yotze, the mitzvah of matzah with the Chalos Toda and the Rikike Nazir? So Amar Li, Lo Shamati. Rabbi Eliezer answers to Rabbi Eloi, I don't know. Fine. The Talmud goes to another Rebbe. Basi v'shalti ifin Rabbi Yeshua. And he went to go ask the same question to Rabbi Yeshua. Amar Li Hare Amru Chalos Tod Rikike Nazir. Shasan le'atzmo. Here's your answer, Rabbi Yeshua says, Rabbi Eloi. It's our Mishnah. It's our Mishnah. This is the Mishnah on Lamed Hey. I think it's Lamed Hey. Yeah, it's the Mishnah on Lamed Hey. So it's quoting our Gemara. What's the answer to Rabbi Yeshua? The Mishnah says, Chalos Tod Rikike Nazir Shasan le'atzmo Ein Adam Yotze Bahen. When you make them for the sake of Zebach, for the sake of the Mikdash, no good. That doesn't count. But limkor bashuk yotze bahen. But if you're going to make them to sell, then it's mutter. So says the Gemara, all part of the brisa. Shebasi, Rabbi Eloi says, when I got back, v'hirtzeisi, I presented dvarim lifnei Rabbi Eliezer. I presented the answer of Rabbi Yeshua. It was Taka Mishnah right here in Pesachim Daf Lamed Hey. And I went back to Rabbi Eliezer and said, Rebbe, I spoke to Rabbi Yeshua. He gave me the answer. Just wanted to fill you in. I learned the answer to your question. To my question, I asked you about what was the case. I asked you about the case of the Chalos Toda and the Rikike Nazir, and you didn't know. Rabbi Yeshua gave me the answer to the Mishnah on Lamed Hey. So when he repeated back the answer, Amar Li, Rabbi Yeshua said one of two things. Amar Li, bris. Rashi says it's the lashon of Shavua. Not the last Rashi on the page. 3 lines from the bottom, bris, and then it goes on Shavua. It's a language of Shavua. Bris. Hein hadvarim shenemar lo l'Moshe miSinai. Oh, this is Torah miSinai. Absolutely beautiful. So what do you mean? How do you know it's Torah miSinai if you didn't know the answer 5 minutes ago? Some of the Meforshim say Rabbi Eliezer never said something unless he heard from his Rebbe. Period. Someone would be asking him. He may know the answer. He may know what to do himself. But he would not say the answer unless he heard it from his Rebbe, very makbid, to make sure that everything he repeated was part of the Masorah. But he knew that it was halacha l'Moshe miSinai. He knew, he just didn't, he kept his mouth shut. That's a tremendous amount of humility. Ika de Amre, there are those who say that no, Rabbi Eliezer was responding with surprise. Rashi says, Lashon bitmiya. Rashi says, Ika de Amre, 2 lines from Adam, bitmiya amarle. He said in wonderment, and what did he say? He says, hein, bris, really? Are you serious? Hein, hadvarim shenemar lo l'Moshe miSinai v'lo taima baya. You're saying this like it's such an obvious thing, as if it's from Har Sinai with no rationale behind it, as to why to distinguish between when it's made for Zebach versus when you make it for the Shuk. Who cares? It's matzah. Eat the matzah. Why are you distinguishing? Why did Rabbi Yehoshua, who gave you the answer, be like, why did Rabbi Yehoshua say, oh yeah, Dvarim Pshutim, it's a Mishnah of Pesachim, that when the Chalos Toda and when the Rikike Nazir are made for the sake of Zebach, it's a 0 for matzah. But when it's made for the Shuk, when it's made for the public, it's everything for matzah. You're saying it like it's so obvious. The time of my, what then really is the reason? Why did Rabbi Yeshua quote this Mishnah? Why is it true that we make a distinction between the two? Says the Gemara, Omar Rabba says, Kol lashuk im luche mimlach. When a person makes something for the shuk in the marketplace, when you buy something to sell, there's something going on in your brain. Im luche mimlach means that you can change your mind. What does that mean? Here we go. Omar, im mizdaben. If I sell my product, great, it sells. Cash in pocket. Ilom mizdaben, eipuk behu ana. But if I don't sell it, then I'll be yotze, at least myself. There's a mindset there of lishma. I made it, I know that I made it, but if I don't sell it, at least I'm going to use it. There's no loss there. But when the chalos todim and kikinas are made for the sake of the zevach, they're made for the sake of halachic purposes, not eating matzah related, but based on mikdash related, you're never going to eat it. It's never going to be, it's not for you. It's not for you. It's made to be a zevach. So that answer to the Gemara was Rabba's answer as how he explained the brisa. It's interesting because Rabba's answer on the top of the page was not this. Rabba's answer was the limitation of the fact that it's not made for the sake of matzah. Maybe they're similar in their tone. We have to compare the Rabb on the bottom of the page to the Rabb on the top of the page to make sure that they make sense. Mir Hashem will start tomorrow with Daf Lamed Tes, all about the Yerakos with which one can be Yotze, the mitzvah of Maror. Wishing you all a beautiful night.